Francis, I'm the Executive Director of Citizens Union, which is a citywide group that serves as a watchdog in the city and state government, fighting to make sure that democracy works for all New Yorkers. We fight corruption. We were founded back in the late 1890s in response to the corruption of Camden Hall and affairs of the city. We've been at the forefront of advocating for greater access to our democracy and making sure that our government operates in a far more representative, efficient, and effective way. And we're pleased to be joined here tonight with the New York Immigration Coalition in sponsoring this important conversation. This is the second of 5 forums that we're holding throughout the city. We were pleased to be hosted tonight by Appointe. Thank you very much, Francis and Luis. And we're also thrilled to be joined by an expert panel of people who are working on this issue and who know about the impact that this issue has and the potential for it on the communities and neighborhoods throughout the city. We'd like to maybe suggest a little bit different format here. We would like to engage in a conversation with all of you, and so as we go through each of the panelists' remarks and we start to ask them questions and engage them, we're not necessarily going to have a strict separation between our conversation and inviting you to participate. So as we have a conversation among ourselves up here, if you want to make a comment about something that somebody has said or ask a question about one of the issues that have been raised by all these, please jump in. From a citizens union perspective, we think that a healthy democracy depends largely on the participation of its citizens and its voters and the people who are residents of our great city. As one way of looking toward the participation in our democracy, we are beginning to look at the issue of non-citizen voting as a way in which to possibly engage a greater number of New Yorkers in the city in which we live. We have not yet developed a position on it. This tonight, as well as this whole forum and a series of forums, is about educating and informing New Yorkers who are interested about this issue, but also hearing from New Yorkers throughout the 5 boroughs and their points of view on this, both pro and con. This is not meant to be a forum about why we're going to tell you the importance of non-citizen voting. There are some speakers that will speak to that tonight, but we really want to have this as an opportunity to educate and inform and most importantly, listen to you and your questions and your issues, your concerns and your hopes and aspirations. So I thank you for turning out tonight what is one of the first cold nights of the arriving winter, and look forward to a very good conversation. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Steve Choi.
Great, thank you. So my name is Steve Choi, I'm the Executive Director of the New York Immigration Coalition. And we are here, we're working, as Dick said, as part of several forums that we are having across the city. And the reason that we are having these forums is because non-citizen voting is one of the most critical issues of civic engagement that we are thinking about for immigrant communities. The New York Immigration Coalition has been around since 1986, and we have served to represent New York's diverse immigrant community since then. And over the last 15 years, we have a civic engagement program that primarily works to empower immigrants to the voting process. So we engage in a lot of voter registration, voter education, voter mobilization, working with a lot of different diverse communities all across both New York City and also New York State. And one of the things that we have been thinking is, how do we expand the concept of civic engagement beyond simply voting? There's a lot of ways in which you can engage immigrant communities. And so thinking through some of those concepts, like participatory voting, that's something that, similar to non-citizen voting, was something that people hadn't heard of before, but it actually has had a tremendous impact and is growing in that impact this year as we see more and more immigrant communities coming out and saying, how can I be part of the civic process? And so as we look at things such as participatory voting, non-citizen voting is clearly on the list, and it's a very hot topic. Just last Friday, it was the center of several questions that were posed to the mayor and the city council speaker. So this is definitely something that we think is very timely as we look forward to the rest of this year and early next year as well. How do we get community input on this? What does the community actually think in terms of non-citizen voting? What are the pros, what are the cons, and what do people really think about this? So we are very glad to be joined by such an excellent panel today, and to really hear and flesh out exactly what are the arguments for non-citizen voting and what are the arguments against. And our intention is to have a civil, reasonable, and respectful dialogue about this, and so we are very excited. And I want to echo Dick's comment. I think, we have a more intimate gathering here today, so let's make this a conversation. Let's make this back and forth a true dialogue about some of the issues that are on the table tonight.
So we're going to turn to the first panel, but before we do, let me just introduce all five of you. Luis Guerra-Costa is no stranger here to the Williamsburg community, but also no stranger to the city of New York. He's a member of the board of Citizens Union, the founder and president of Puente, and we're thrilled to be working with Luis on not only this issue, but a number of other issues. There is a program that lists all of the speakers and their bios, but I'll just quickly acknowledge them and go down the line. We're also joined by Mike Benjamin, who is a resident of the Bronx and who was with us last week when we had a very similar form of a hostess community college. He is a public affairs consultant and a contributing columnist in the New York Post and City and State, a former member of the State Assembly who served with distinction, and also he was a former head of the Bronx operations of the Board of Elections. We're also pleased to be joined by Kevin Douglas, who's the Deputy Director of the New York State Policy and Advocacy organization responsible for, Deputy Director of UNH, where he oversees the state policy and advocacy efforts for that organization. He's also has worked to promote universal health care in Connecticut and has been an advocate on many different issues at the state and national levels for affordable housing. We're very pleased to have him here as well. To my far left is Ramon Figueroa, who's the Executive Director of the Southside United HDFC, the largest multi-service organization in Williamsburg, so no stranger to many of you as well. The organization develops and manages affordable housing, prevents tenant displacement, and runs a senior center and a food pantry. And then at the end of the table is Stephen Sacco, who's a staff attorney at the African Services Committee. He's someone who knows this issue very well, and he also appeared with us last week in Hostess and talked about some of the legal ramifications and issues that we need to be considered. So we're very pleased to have all five of them here tonight with us. And with that, I'll turn it over to you and start.
It is probably one of the top issues in our community. If I were to tell you about a place where thousands and thousands of people who live there for 10 years, 20, 40, 50 years are legal, obey the law, pay taxes, but are not allowed to vote outside of this particular meeting, you probably think, well, that's probably some despotic, tyrannical system somewhere beyond the United States. But it's New York City. New York City. You know how I got into this? I got into this because, and why I pushed that we have this debate, this discussion at Citizens Union, which I'm proud to be vice chair. Because one day I'm out there at the primary election day, trying to get people to come and vote for the NRA. And virtually every white person, white American, that I tried to engage in a conversation told me that they couldn't vote because they were not citizens. I said, what? This is here. I think it was on the bus side. I said, I couldn't believe it. It was shocking. So, yes, it's not just about we Dominicans. It is about Irish. It is about Europeans. It's about a whole bunch of people who are not, are able to vote even though they're paying taxes. We learned long ago, as Francis mentioned, that our founding fathers believed that taxation without representation is tyranny. In Puerto Rico, Citizenship was imposed on people like my mother. In 1898, you know the history. The U.S. invaded Puerto Rico to liberate us from the Spaniards. By the way, they were giving us self-determination credit. In much the same way as I think President Reagan liberated medical students from Grenada who didn't need liberation. But at any rate, here we are. And we're told in Puerto Rico that we cannot vote in federal elections because we don't pay federal taxes. But the reverse is not true. Because here we're paying taxes and we're not allowed. Shouldn't we be allowed to decide who picks up our garbage? Who decides on the policies of our schools? Because now the mayor has total control, and we cannot elect the mayor. Should we be able to decide who decides whether we have a fire engine company in our community and whether we'll be safe as a result of it? Whether we have the right kind of police chief and the right kind of policing? Should we be able to do that? I brought with me the papers that are given out by the U.S. government on naturalization and becoming a citizen. Well, it says here that you have to wait 5 years. And then maybe these days it might take another 2 years, sometimes more, to become a citizen. But it also says something very interesting in terms of all the qualifications. You got to pass the civics test, you have a whole bunch of things. And this last one is kind of interesting. That you can prove that you can read, write, and speak basic English. Now, we have no national language. English is not the national language of the United States. We don't have it. And yet we're imposing that issue on people. Now, my mother never saw the inside of the classroom. She didn't know how to read and write. She was so proud of the fact that she knew the issues, that she watched television carefully, and that she talked to her neighbors, and was so proud that she could vote. She could vote because she was Puerto Rican. My Dominican father couldn't vote until he decided to go to the army as a way of becoming a citizen. Is that fair? Today, most people in Washington Heights cannot vote. What kind of violence does that do to a community where some people are powerful and others have no power? How does that play into our democratic process of really engaging people in democracy if some people are totally left out on such simple issues of, who picks up the garbage, like I said. Antonio Reynoso was here today, and is a light in the political world. We're so proud of him as our city councilor. Someday, could be our congressman, could be our U.S. Senator. He's very young, and if he continues the way he's going, I have no doubt. But that's only going to be possible if, in fact, many of the people in our community and throughout the city can vote. So we are limiting even the good, progressive, hard-working politicians that we could have if we engage this incredible, large sector of our community.
Thank you, Luis. So now we'd like to turn the mic over to Ramon Higuera to talk a little bit about the U.S. immigration system and how it impacts communities, especially here locally. So, Ramon, if you want to talk about that topic, that'd be great.
Yeah, I don't think it's fair to follow Luis. It's very difficult to follow Luis and his eloquence.
Don't let him pitch it.
I want to thank Citizens Union for this invitation. I would like to, since we're talking about the possibility of the right to vote, I would like to redo, and I would challenge Dick and Citizens Union to come back to Williamsburg. And I know that David Medina, our Director of Housing Resources, and Edith Minaya, out in the audience, they will bring out 150 to 200 people to ensure that this most important issue is heard. I understand through our city council member who just came from a forum where they were talking to the neighbors in another area. And I also believe that Southside Mission, that deals specifically with immigration, should also be involved in this. We have, you asked me to talk about immigration as it relates to this community, but the fact is that when we look back at the history of Williamsburg, this is an immigrant community. From day one, from the Dutch to the Germans, to later on the Hasidic community, to the Puerto Rican, Dominican, Ecuadorians, Central South Americans, we're talking about a community of immigrants that came here, the people that in 1903 when the Williamsburg Bridge was opened, it was opened because it was built on the back of immigrants. Why am I here? Southside United Housing Development Fund Corporation, better known as Los Lunes, was established in 1972. For what purpose? It was the purpose to organize the then Puerto Rican community that existed in this community, to ensure that their rights were not violated, to educate them on what their rights were, and to ensure that they had quality housing, and that they could be represented in an appropriate manner when it came to housing issues. Since then, Los Lunes became the first organization, nonprofit organization, to receive a contract from the city of New York to rehab a building in the city of New York during the Koch administration. And we have gone to develop over 5,000 units of affordable housing. We have a tremendous organizing team led by people like Danny Medina and co-anchor with someone like Edith Minaya and others. And what we do is we develop affordable housing. We organize to ensure that the displacement that's going on and the gentrification, to minimize and to mitigate some of the impact of the low-income families. We have the senior center to ensure that the people that are at the low ages of their life and live and sweat in this community, who stay in this community. We have 100 units of senior housing to make sure that we house our most precious gems, the people that have the history and the stories to tell the grandkids. And how does that affect this forum? Well, the reality is that perhaps meetings of them could be better suited to be in this panel because they live it every day. A lot of the people that we serve are people that are not citizens, either residents or undocumented. And the greatest challenge is to have those individuals come forth and place a complaint against a slumlord or a landlord that is trying to push them out because they see the market and the rents in Williamsburg going up, and they're trying to see how they can take advantage of that on the backs of a poor immigrant family. And when you talk about housing, and when you talk about the ability to have resources, you have a person like my mother that came here by herself in 1973 to Los Lunes. We grew up here, raising 7 children by herself. It's very difficult. Knowing that the immigration system does not allow you as a resident to petition and have your spouse come anytime soon. So you have to make it on your own. Or know that if found to be undocumented, the breadwinner of the house is going to be deported. And you have to figure out how to pay the high rents that are going on in Williamsburg. Those are some of the challenges that we are seeing in our community. And the fact that the immigration code is so convoluted and the level of education of some of the people that we deal with is so low, they are afraid of trying to exercise any possible right that they might have because they believe that they have no rights. And the landlords and the powers that we understand that they are at that level and they take advantage of that to push them out, to scare them, to threaten them with eviction, to threaten them with calling immigration, to threaten them with, violent harm because you can't go to the police. Because the police is going to ask you and you are going to then be deported. So that is how the work that we're doing is being impacted by the immigration laws that not only, it goes further than just the right to vote. It's the right to exist, the right to live, the right to enjoy the community that a lot of people help build. You know, I have a father, and don't ask me why, that has been here 40 years, and he's not a citizen. And for someone to tell him that he doesn't know the issues, he doesn't belong, or he doesn't have the right to a voice in the political world, the local political world, is insane. And I think it's time for us to give a voice to the voiceless, because these individuals that we're talking about, the residents and the immigrant population, you know, Luis was talking about the requirements. And one of the interesting things is that when we look at immigration and when the immigration, when we talk about changing our status, one of the questions is, are you a person of good moral character? And good moral character, for the most basic part, is seen as, are you paying taxes? Have you kept up with the taxes? So the federal government, the state government, the municipal governments are saying to these immigrants, I want you to pay taxes. I want you to support the infrastructure. I want you to take care of all the social services that we have here. However, I am not going to allow you to have a voice as to how those resources are divvied up. I am not going to give you the choice to determine when and how benefits are given and to whom they're given. And by the way, you might not be eligible for them. And I think it's time for us as a community of immigrants to come together and say, no mas, it is time for immigration laws to change to reflect the reality of our world. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. Kevin, you want to talk a little bit about the history of non-citizens voting here in Parliament?
Sure, thank you. So I think it's really important to hear the word that Dick said, the history of this. You just mentioned this idea of giving a voice to the immigrant community. And those of us who are kind of working in the issue don't necessarily see it as giving a voice as much as restoring a voice and a privilege that was historically part of our nation for over 150 years. And really since our inception in 1776, when we got this whole party started, voting was not limited. We're not hearing this. How about this? Voting wasn't limited to folks based on their immigration status or whether they were a citizen or not. The idea was if you were white, if you were a male, if you owned property, that was good enough. And in fact, as we wanted to spread westward and started acquiring more territories and wanted people to go out and settle, the idea was let's incentivize people going out there by granting aliens the right to vote and run for office and be part of the local legislature in those territories if they were to go out and settle. So this was kind of how we were started, with an understanding that citizenship was not necessarily a prerequisite for voting. And this was the case for more or less the next 150 years. We got along fine. There was obviously some bumps along the road there. But that was the case. This was not a new idea. It was not a foreign idea. This had been around. So what happened was, towards the late 1800s, we started seeing significant waves of immigrants, and particularly from communities that were not the traditional immigrants that had been coming in and looked a little bit different. There was some fear about dilution of voting power. There was some fear about the rise of new movements, whether it was a populist movement, the labor movement. You had obviously the enfranchisement of African Americans, and so there was a loss of power in that space. And so you had World War I, the early part of the 1900s. So in this kind of 50-year window, late 1800s, early 1900s, we had this kind of fear backlash and moved to limit voting. And so you saw things like the poll tax, which was designed to eliminate parts of electorate. You had things like literacy testing, you had felon disenfranchisement, and then you started to see the stripping of voting rights based on citizenship. And so this was a period at our time where there was a lot of xenophobia, there was fear of immigrants, and we saw a lot of really disgusting laws passed. We had the Chinese Exclusion Act, and outright said, you're not allowed to come to this country for 10 years if you're from China. We had the Immigration Act in 1924 that essentially said, let's roll back the clock 30 years and then base our quotas based on who's in the country at that period of time. So the loss of immigrant voting was tied into a desire to really kind of limit the power of the immigrant communities and occurred alongside limiting the power for African Americans. And fortunately, since then we have seen progress. We saw the 15th saw the right to vote extended from 21-year-olds to 18-year-olds. So there has been this positive bent towards restoring voting rights and being more inclusive in our democracy. More contemporary sense, in New York City actually, for many, many decades, the 60s really through the early 2000s, anyone in New York City could vote for school board elections. Didn't matter what your status was. It was understood that if you had a child in the public school system, you had a stake in how it was run, so you were allowed to vote, and that was very successful for many years. More recently, participatory budgeting here in Williamsburg and around other parts of the city. If you are a community member over the age of 16, you can vote. You don't have to have citizenship to have a stake in the community. So we have seen contemporary examples of, I guess, what you call non-citizen voting, and not necessarily just here in New York, but also around the country. In Chicago, since the late 80s, you could vote in school elections, regardless of your citizenship status. In Massachusetts, we had 4 towns who passed legislation who said we want to allow voting for local residents in our municipal elections. Unfortunately, the state didn't, give them the authorizing legislation, so they weren't able to move forward. But there's been also half a dozen other states around the country who have been looking at initiatives like this. And actually, in Maryland, we have 6 towns today, right now, where you don't have to be a citizen to vote in local elections. Tacoma Park is probably the most notable among them. So there's been a lot of effort around the country to recognize the fact that if you are a contributing member of the community, if you pay taxes, if you have a stake in the community, you should have a voice, and there's been really positive efforts to move forward. There has been some stumbles along the way. There were 2 referendums in 2010 in Portland and San Francisco that would grant this right to municipal voting powers. They lost by narrow margins, something like low 50s to high 40s. So it was something the community was engaged in and thought about, and we're hopeful that, at least those of us working in the campaign to bring this to New York City, that it can happen. And where we are today is that really for the past decade or so, we've had legislation carried by a number of council members that would restore voting here in New York City that says any resident in the city who's been here for 6 months or more can vote in local elections. And we've had upwards of 30 plus council members out of a 52 council member body support this. We didn't get across the finish line. There was opposition from the previous mayor. There were some questions about whether the speaker supported it. So there was questions about whether we actually could do it even though we had the numbers. So where we are today in 2014 is we're ready to have another run at it. There is legislation that will be introduced in the near future, which 27 council members signed on. The speaker, in response to those questions she was asked last week, indicated it was something she was supportive of. So we really see this as the next step forward. And just in terms of the timeline, I think it's really fascinating. The gaps. 1870 was the voting for basic race. It took 50 years before we recognized it for women. Another 50 years before it was for 18-year-olds. We're pretty much that 50-year mark right now, and so we think this is the time to restore voting rights for immigrants in our city.
Thank you, Kevin. Before we move on, I think we've heard several perspectives that obviously greatly support this and make some compelling arguments. I want to ask you, it's passed. It's been around in Tacoma Park and some other areas of Maryland for quite a while, and yet, and to my knowledge, it has not successfully been implemented anywhere else, and it's been a while. So, what is the reason for that? And is the opposition that you're seeing, even in very sort of liberal progressive places like Portland and San Francisco, is it driven by pure racism? Is it driven by something else? Are there other concerns at work?
I think those are really fair questions. I don't think just racism out now is the primary obstacle, although that certainly plays part of a role in the discussion. I think people really stronger have this connection between what it means to be a citizen and voting. And actually it's interesting, some of the opposition that we have seen in different communities about this is from immigrant community themselves who are citizens and said, hey look, I went through this long arduous process and now I have my right to vote. Why should someone else who's not a citizen have the right to vote? We think there are compelling arguments why those folks should have an equal stakes in the community, paying taxes. But I think that's part of the concern. I think there's been an anti-immigrant backlash for many years in this country as we've, the movements move forward, whether it's the DREAM Act at the national level, whether it's immigration reform. So I think there's been a lot of pushback around many initiatives that would really expand the scope of rights, responsibilities for immigrants. One other thing that I would mention about the relative success or lack of it in Tacoma Park or other areas is that getting the right to vote alone is not enough. That is the first step. We know that there are there's a real problem in our country in terms of civic engagement and voter suppression, and a narrow participation rate. And I think this is one tool of many that can be used to increase civic engagement, but by itself is not going to solve any problem. We need to make sure that we're going to communities and convincing them that we have efficient, transparent, non-corrupt governments who are going to hear their voices and actually do well and vote. So it's the first step of the process, and I think we can do it.
Thank you, Kevin. So now we'd like to move on to Michael Benjamin, who will present some practical concerns and also talk a little bit about how this would be implemented, what kind of obstacles to face, and present a little bit different perspectives. So Michael, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. One, I want to thank you, Brock. I want to thank you for allowing me without a passport into Brooklyn. It's a fine place too.
You know, you can't vote here. You only can vote in Baltimore.
Well, I actually voted in Brooklyn back in 2012 when I was actually a resident here. So yeah, I have voted in Brooklyn too. As a citizen, I also once ran around to board elections, and as such, I understood that when the board elections ran, the school board elections, which took place in the month of May, which allowed citizens and non-citizens to vote, there was a separate registration form for non-citizens for them to fill out, and it was kept separately at the board, and there was a coding in the data system, so we knew who was a school board voter only, and then who were voters, who were citizens who could vote in every other election. My family background is from the other U.S. colony. My family comes from the U.S. Virgin Islands, and they were conferred American citizenship when their islands were bought in 1917 from the nation of Denmark. And so we were conferred U.S. citizens, but could only vote when we were on the mainland. I don't believe any U.S. citizen, whether in territory or not, should be denied the right to vote in federal elections. And that requires constitutional change, and that's why Americans who live on territory, in territory, cannot vote. That's in the U.S. Constitution. That needs to be changed. That's a separate discussion from non-citizen voting. Up until 1804, non-citizens voted in New York State. So for the last 214 years, non-citizens have not voted in New York State, other than in New York City school board elections for 13 years from 1969 until several years ago. It can be administered, but part of my objection to it is creating and sort of institutionalizing second-class citizenship. Because we're telling persons who are non-citizens would then have a right to vote in city elections, to vote for the mayor, citywide offices, city council, that at the same time, if there is on that same ballot, a person running for district attorney as was last year, you could not, as a non-citizen, vote for Brooklyn DA. You could not, as a Brooklyn resident or a non-citizen, you would not be able to vote for a state Supreme Court judge or a civil court judge who have just as much influence and effect in your life as a member of the city council or the mayor or any other citywide official. We should not look to institutionalize second-class citizenship. As a former elected official and a Democrat who worked in a lot of campaigns, I worked side by side, and I've campaigned among non-citizens looking for their support. Because if you're not, you can still support a candidate. You can still have influence on how that person operates as an elected official and what they advocate for when they're in Albany or they're in Washington, D.C. or in the city council. Because you're still living here, whether you have a vote or not. And one's power does not only come from the ability to vote. The ability to organize, to have a voice, to get your neighbors to work with you, to push an issue, is something that you can do whether you're a citizen or a non-citizen. Again, we should not look to create separate, we have to create a separate ballot for non-citizens. Again, we're making people understand that they're different than their neighbors. And I don't want to see us start that process. We need to have a path towards citizenship. Find ways of more quickly naturalizing persons who have been here in the United States of New York and not creating a separate system. Nor should we have a city of New York allow only our residents who are non-citizens to vote, but then in the rest of the state. If your income increases and you want to move to Yonkers, you move to Yonkers after having voted in city elections, you then can't vote elections in Yonkers. Now, how fair is that if you've been used to voting in your municipal elections? There ought to be a movement, if that's what you really want to do, a movement that is statewide and a movement that is national, so so that we don't create second-class citizens. Could you imagine if women or African Americans who had their rights to vote properly established? You told women in 1920, well, you can only vote on Tuesdays in years ending in odd numbers because we think that's more appropriate for you as you move towards beginning to inculcate and become better citizens. That would be acceptable. We wouldn't want to create a second-class set of voters, and we should not look to do that when it comes to non-citizens.
Thank you, Michael. Before we turn it over to Steve to talk a little bit about the legal requirements and the barriers that need to be overcome, the considerations that need to be taken into account, Michael, let me ask you, could we argue that we already have a second-class form of citizenship by not having non-citizens vote in city elections already? And two, do you see a path forward where your opposition to non-citizen voting could be mitigated by having some kind of, is there a way that you could accept non-citizen voting, I guess? I mean, in terms of restricting it to people who are only green card holders, or some other, starting out with a very tight definition. But my first question is really, don't we already have second-class citizenship by asking people to pay taxes already and not be able to participate in electing who their representative are?
Well, to the first part of your question, if it was something that the entire state wanted to do, probably could support that, and not just in one municipality. Second, yes, there is this, it appears to be second-class status, not second-class citizenship, because they aren't citizens. But it can.
So there's
I can be a person who likes rules, and if there are rules that are in place that lead to a path towards citizenship, and part of that end result of being a citizen is voting something that's concrete, as well as other things that come from being a U.S. citizen, it ought to remain in place. There ought not to be barriers to the person wanting to become a citizen. If that means lowering fees that make it easier for a person to save, to begin to move for the path of citizenship, to not make English the entirety of what's in the application system, to do those sort of things and make it a little easier for a person to transition to become a citizen and create a greater incentive to do that, and I'm all for it.
great. So thank you, Michael. So Stephen, why don't you talk a little bit about the law surrounding non-citizen voting and give us legal education 101 on this?
Sure. So thank you so much for inviting me here to speak about the law on this issue. So I was asked to come and sort of quickly explain what the legal barriers would or wouldn't be to non-citizen voting, to the kind of very recent proposal that Kevin discussed for the city council that would enfranchise all the language as lawfully present non-citizens who've been resident of the 5 boroughs for the last 6 months. So anytime you want to answer the question of whether something is lawful at the city level, you actually have to answer the question of whether it's lawful at the state and federal level as well. The easiest way to think of it is a 3-tiered cake, with the bottom tier is federal, the middle tier is state law, and the top tier is city law. Anytime a city or a municipality wants to pass laws, they can increase rights, but they can't reduce the rights that you have at the state and federal level. So you can think of the state and federal tiers as a floor, not a ceiling. That is to say, you go above them in rights, but you can't go below them. So as long as it doesn't try to go below the 2 bottom tiers, it's lawful. So let's start with the bottom tier, federal law. At federal level, you can't vote in federal elections, that's prohibited. And you can't vote contrary to a state law. But if the state law said that you could vote, said that